menus from a restaurant, or if you have a bar that has like karaoke night that they want to promote to their customers, we try to get that content from them and then surface that data on Google search. Also joined today by Will, who will be joining in the Q&A session later. Will works on the kind of cloud computing, cloud consulting side of things. So at Google, our mission is to sort of help organize the world's information and make it accessible for everyone to be able to use. And when we say that we try to build for everyone, we really mean building for everyone. And so it's really important that we have a team that is representative of the users that we try and serve. And so we do this in a few places. Firstly, we try to practice this in our workplace by creating a sort of work environment that is collaborative and inclusive for everybody on the team. We also try to do this in our products by building products that are accessible for our users and kind of designed to meet our user needs. Lastly, we do this in our society, sort of innovating and building technology to solve sort of large societal problems. Okay, so with that said, we're going to talk a bit about the interview process for interns. So the internship interview process is a few phases. The first one is sort of this online coding assessment and kind of work style survey. In this phase, you'll be given this like online editor with like a problem that's given to you, and then you're able to kind of write the solution in the editor and submit the solution in the kind of online assessment. If that goes well, there'll be a next phase, which is the kind of technical interview. This is the part where you'll be able to kind of have a video call with someone who works at Google, and they'll present like a problem to you, and you're expected to kind of solve the problem within this roughly 1 hour, 45-minute interview. So there'll be 2 rounds of that with 2 different interviewers, 2 different types of problems. And if all those goes well, then the next step is like this project search space where you kind of identify what you're interested in, what skills you have, and your recruiter will kind of work with you to try to match you with like a manager who is looking for an internship and align you with like a project to work on for the summer. And if all this goes well, then the final step is the offer stage, yeah, you get to kind of start your internship at Google. So for the technical interview, this is going to be a 45-minute interview. It's split up into 3 different phases. The first phase is just like 5 minutes to kind of introduce yourself to your interviewer. This is opportunity for you just to get to know each other, kind of talk a little bit about your background, share like maybe more information on your resume, etc. The next 35 minutes is the kind of the main focus of the interview. So it'll be 35 minutes for like the technical assessment. This is where you're given a technical problem by your interviewer, and you work with your interviewer to try to solve this problem and write out code to create the solution. And you'll have 5 minutes at the end to kind of have some closing questions. If you have any questions about kind of working at Google or anything else, this is a great opportunity to kind of talk to the interviewer and get some answers from them. And I will say, I think what I've seen is that if you're able to kind of come up with some well thought out questions for this part, it can help strengthen your case and your likelihood of kind of passing the overall interview. That we're assessing for. Firstly is your communication and collaboration. How well were you able to kind of communicate your ideas and your thought process, and how well were you able to collaborate with your interviewer? So, like incorporating feedback, for example, from your interviewer as you're kind of going through the process of solving the problem. Secondly, we're also looking at kind of assessing your data structures and algorithms knowledge. It's really important to have a solid fundamental understanding of like the computer science fundamentals. We're also looking at your problem-solving abilities and your analytical abilities. Did you solve the problem in a sort of methodological way, and were you able to analyze the solution after? And lastly, we're looking at your kind of code quality and understanding. Did you write code that's readable and kind of maintainable over the long run? And in particular, we won't be asking you any like brain teasers like, why is a manhole round, or like how many golf balls can you fit into this auditorium, or something like that. So from the interviewer's perspective, they'll be asking a few questions. Firstly, like how well did you analyze the problem? Were you thinking about like test cases or any special like edge cases that you wanted to be like mindful of? As you were kind of solving the problem, did you approach the problem in a way that was kind of methodical and logical? And were you able to communicate your thought process as you were going along? We'll also be looking at your kind of grasp of like the fundamental computer science concepts, and kind of looking at the working code that you were able to write. Were you able to write code that works? And did you test the code after the implementation? For the code quality, was the code kind of clean and easy to read? And was it sort of self-consistent style, for example? And I think the main thing I would want to call out is that there's kind of a wide array of things that your interviewer will be assessing. It's more than just kind of, did you solve the problem or did you not? We really want to understand kind of how you solved the problem and kind of how you were able to analyze the problem afterwards. So the key steps for succeeding in the technical interviews is we have 4 steps that we've identified. The first one is kind of clarifying the question that's been given to you. The second step is designing a solution once you've kind of understood the problem, then writing code to sort of to implement the solution that you've identified, and then lastly testing the code to make sure that it works as expected. So for the first step on clarifying the question, you'll be given a problem from the interviewer, and what you want to do right at the very beginning is ask some clarifying questions to do a few things. Number one, make sure that you actually understand the problem and that there isn't sort of, communication issues. Sometimes the interviewer may also want to kind of test your ability to kind of deal with ambiguity. So the problem may actually be deliberately understated, and we're testing for your ability to kind of detect that, to realize, there's kind of additional information that's like missing from the problem, your ability to identify what that information you need to know and what the right questions to ask is. This is also a good stage to kind of, ask about various assumptions that you can make, test edge case input like edge cases, and kind of, identify a few like test cases and kind of check with your interviewer that the outcome that you expect for various test inputs, input data, is that you're aligned with your interviewer on this to make sure that you understand the problem. What you definitely do not want to do is kind of start solving the problem right away and then sort of finding out that you misunderstood the problem and you solved the wrong problem from the interviewer. So once you've asked your clarifying questions, the next step is to kind of design a solution. It's really important that you don't just start diving into like writing code right away. What you want to do is kind of come up with some kind of high-level design with your for how you would solve the problem, and kind of writing down some like notes on like your idea of the algorithm that you would solve the problem. In this step, you want to do things like analyze the solution that you've identified, like talk about what the runtime complexity is, what the memory complexity is. If you're able to figure out multiple solutions to a problem, being able to talk about trade-offs between one solution versus the other. And make sure in this part that you're thinking about the edge cases that that might be relevant to the problem. So yeah, really important here to that you're communicating with your interviewer. We want to understand your thought process, and if you get blocked on like trying to figure out a problem, your interviewer might be able to give you hints to try to unblock you here. So after you've kind of designed a solution, the next step is writing out the code. Just a few tips here might be helpful for when you're writing out the solution to break your code into smaller functions, like creating helper functions, for example. Especially if like there's code that's kind of repeated and will be used multiple times, you might want to kind of break that off into a helper function that you call rather than rewriting the same repetitive code. If you don't know like an exact API that you need, this is, you can always talk to your interviewer and see if they can help you out with that. So for the particular language, Google has a lot of people who work here with a lot of expertise in different languages. You can feel free to use the language that you're the most comfortable with. You just want to kind of talk to your recruiter ahead of time to tell them what language you prefer the interviewer to be able to kind of work with you. Lastly, it's really important in this stage that you actually write working code to the best of your ability, and then you're not just writing like pseudocode here. And the final step after you've written the code is running through a test case. Shouldn't assume that your code works as you kind of expect. It's actually very likely in your first implementation that there's some kind of bug or somewhere in the code, and so you'll want to walk line by line through some test inputs and see that your code works as expected. If you're able to identify a bug while doing this debugging and sort of be able to fix it or identify the solution on the fly, this actually can kind of look very good for you. And if you identify ways to kind of optimize your solution even more, you can also call that out and talk to your interviewer about it. And your interviewer might ask you to follow up with optimizing the code after you finish debugging. So some common mistakes to avoid. Number one, again, is just jumping into the code right away. Really important that you do these first two steps ahead of time, before writing the code, which is one, asking clarifying questions, and then two, kind of creating a high-level design to get alignment with your interviewer on what the problem is and how you're going to what algorithm you're going to write to solve the problem. Secondly, second common mistake is not thinking about test examples or edge cases that you'll need to be able to handle. Having some examples that you've kind of thinking are going to be relevant can help make sure that you're aligned with your interviewer on the problem itself, that you're not misunderstanding the problem, and identifying edge cases can help you make sure that your initial design and implementation are correct. Thirdly is not writing real code. At some point you want to write real code to solve the problem. And lastly is kind of not understanding the problem or trying to prematurely optimize. The most important thing here is that you're able to kind of create a working solution. And so even if the first iteration of your solution is, maybe it's a brute force solution, it's better to have some solution that works and then kind of optimizing it afterwards rather than kind of trying to dive into optimizing right away and then you're not able to sort of come up with any working solution. And so now we'll walk through an example as a chance to practice. So the question is, write a function to detect if a string containing parentheses is balanced. So we have a couple of test cases here. So if we have a string that's a left parentheses and a right parentheses, then we'll consider this to be balanced. If you have parentheses where you have a string where you have some left parentheses that's unopened or unclosed, then we'll consider this to be false. And similarly, if we have right parentheses that are not closed by a left one, then we'll consider this to be unbalanced. So yeah, as we kind of talked, the first step is to try to ask some clarifying questions. Does anybody have any thoughts on what questions we would want to ask in this stage? Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So can the input string contain the round parentheses or the square brackets? That's something that it's good to ask about. Let's assume for this problem, it's going to be round parentheses only. Does anybody else have any questions? Any clarifying questions they would want to ask? Yes.
So for balance, does that particularly mean that you just have an even amount of open and closed brackets? Example, let's say we have test case number 2, right? If we had some closed brackets randomly there, would that be okay? Just to go with an even amount, not necessarily open then closed.
Yeah, that's a great question. So maybe the statement of the problem was kind of understated, And so you want to clarify on like exactly what balance means in this case. Let's say for this problem, we require this to be more than just the same number, but like anytime there's anytime there's a right bracket, there has to be an unclosed left bracket, and by the end of the string,
So like if I see an open bracket, then I must look for a closed bracket after it. That's the
you can have like
idea.
left, left, right, but then it has to be any right bracket that you see has to be preceded by some unclosed left bracket, and by the end of the string, all brackets must be closed.
Okay. So then one more question. So like if I had started with like a bracket on the other side, would that be still valid still or no? Like if I started with a closed bracket, that doesn't matter, right? Like
That would be so if you have a right bracket but there's no left bracket preceding it, then that would be
that would be bad.
balanced.
Got it.
So we would return false. So yeah, that's a great question. Like clarifying the problem statement itself, identifying a few like different types of inputs, and seeing like, hey, this is what we expect. Like, does that sound right to you? Yes. Yeah, it's a great question. So the question was like, is an empty string considered balanced? Empty string here would be like a edge case. It's kind of unclear from the problem like how we would handle that. Let's just assume for this problem that the input will not be an empty string. Yeah. One more. There's a mic.
Hello, my name is Stephanie. My question is, is the input totally closed? For example, if I put three parentheses, is false or is only for that three options?
So the input can be, yeah. So I guess you're asking if we have to handle like test, like input strings that are beyond these three cases.
Yes, if they are the only closed cases.
Yeah. So like, yeah. So we would have to let's say for this problem, we would have to handle all kinds of like combinations of like left and right parentheses as input strings.
Okay.
Yeah. Great question.
Only three types. Thank you.
Yep. And one question I would also kind of just say is, we might also want to ask like, can we assume that the input string will only contain parentheses? Like, what if it contains like the letter A or B like randomly in the middle of the string? Like, how would we handle that? And your interviewer might say like, you can assume that the input string will only be parentheses. So after you've asked the clarifying questions and got alignment with your interviewer on the problem itself, the next step would be just to design the solution. So here we have this like kind of pseudocode solution for an algorithm that we'll design here. So in this case, you can write down some notes on how you would design the solution. Just a few notes that I would call out. It's really important at this point to, as you're trying to figure out what the algorithm should be, to, communicate your thought process with the interviewer so they understand kind of what you're thinking. Also a good idea to, once you've identified a solution, kind of be able to analyze it, talk about like the runtime complexity and memory complexity and whatnot. And if you find ways to kind of optimize the solution beyond what you've kind of initially thought of, you can also kind of talk about that with your interviewer. So next step after the kind of initial design is you've kind of created your initial design. The next step is to actually implement the solution. So not going to walk through this whole code. I think that's a few things I would just call out is, notice that the code here is like real working code. It's not pseudocode. And you also want the style to be kind of self-consistent and kind of a clean style. So if you look a few lines down, there's like some comments to explain like some kind of the logic behind the algorithm, if it's like kind of ambiguous or complex, to help make the code more readable or understandable from a reader. And lastly, we'll just want to, like, after we've implemented the code, have a few examples that we've identified previously, and then kind of walking through the kind of working solution line by line to kind of manually debug to make sure that your code works as expected. Here, if you spot any like bugs or any issues with your code, try to fix it, kind of call it out to your interviewer, and they might ask you to try to fix it on the fly. And yeah, and you know, it's very common that like your initial implementation will have some bug of some sort. Having like a perfect solution right away is not so important as like being able to notice the bug yourself and then kind of figuring out how to solve it before the end of the interview. So yeah, now that we talked about the process, you'll be able to, we have a website where you can set up like your Google Careers profile. If you guys want to take a photo of this link. So you can set up a profile, have some information on your contact information, and we can kind of give you personalized recommendations for roles that will fit sort of what you're looking for. So in this kind of profile page, you know, there are, you can kind of customize exactly what the job you're looking for, filter things by like location or what experience level you have. And then you can turn on like alerting for this. So as soon as like, say an internship role opens up in like the fall, you know, you'll be alerted of this right away. So you can kind of apply very early as soon as the role opens up. And yeah, that's it for the presentation. So I guess if anybody has any questions, we can, you know, have an opportunity to kind of answer any questions that you guys might have. Yes.
What is your recommendation of platform to study the kinds of exercise that we could have in the test?
Yes, great question. For me, I think what I did was I just, in terms of like the theoretical concepts, I reviewed like my college data structures and algorithms, notes and textbook. And then beyond that, kind of in terms of practice problems, I use LeetCode. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts?
Okay, and
yeah, if I can also just add, thanks for the question, by the way. My name is Will G, and as Alan was describing earlier, I work for Google Cloud Consulting. But I think one thing that really stood out during Alan's presentation, by the way, first of all, let's give a round of applause to Alan for his amazing presentation. So something that stood out during Alan's presentation that may not be a surprise to you, but also worth calling out is that the collaboration aspect. So when it comes to thinking about how you can collaborate with the interviewer in answering the question, make sure to leverage the interviewer as a resource to help you. So do not hesitate to pay attention to the questions you ask, how you kind of share your problem-solving skills, and also think about how if you had more time, how you would, you know, approach it differently. So I just want to answer your question related to, yes, there is a preparation aspect to it, but also the whole aspect related to mock interview, making sure that, you know, all the different, whether it's preparation, introducing yourself, do you have a good one-liner or two-liners within, say, 1.5 minutes to help the interviewer have a really good understanding of your background, your specialization, a bit about yourself, right? So that part is also super important. Another aspect to it is that, as Alan was mentioning earlier, the question aspect, right? How do you stand yourself out among, you know, maybe a number of interviewees that the interviewer will meet on that day? The questions you ask really help you also kind of stand out and also kind of show your thinking as well as your interest in the role. So I just want to answer that question, but I know there was another question that you had. Yeah, no problem. Was there another question that you had?
I forgot the question. Give me a moment to remember.
No problem.
Yes?
No problem. We'll come back to you. No rush.
Person can
I see a hand raised over there.
Hi, so I'm Shima. Nice to meet you guys. I have two questions. Number one, what if you can't arrive at a solution in the interview, but you're still collaborating with the interviewer. So you're taking in their comments, you're taking in their advice, and you're taking into test cases, whatever it is, and you're just not successful. Do you think there's still a chance that they might move forward with you? That's my first question. My second question is, when it comes to tech internships, I noticed that typically Google and other companies only hire people who are currently at school and not necessarily with a degree. So I understand that the requirements for people with a bachelor's or master's is a bit different. Do you think barrier to entry for people who have a bachelor's or maybe are considering a master's is a bit different or could be more difficult?
Yeah, PBS, you want to take the first question, answer the second?
So your first question was if you're unable to come up with a working solution. I would say a couple of things. Like, number one, really ultimately the only answer I can give to you is, I think none of us know how your interview is going to go and kind of how like the hiring committee is going to think about like the feedback. So it's a little hard to kind of say anything concrete. I think a few things I would say is, firstly, you'll have 2 rounds of interviews. So even if one doesn't go well, you'll have another round where you'll have another chance. It'll be a different problem with a different interviewer. They don't talk to each other before the interview. So like if you go into one round and just like completely get stuck and you're not able to figure out at all, the second interviewer has no idea how your first one went. And so it's kind of a blank slate for you to work off of. I would say the second thing is, as we were kind of saying, like, there's like a whole array of things that like your interviewer will be assessing you for. So I think, yeah, if you can demonstrate like strong analytical abilities, kind of communication, collaboration, I think that's really important. Ultimately, it is fairly important that you're able to solve the problem. And so I think if you go into both interviews and you're not able to come up with a solution, then obviously like the likelihood that you will be accepted becomes lower. I think what I would recommend is focusing in on at least trying to come up with a brute force solution if like the problem is hard. I think usually what I notice is if you have a problem, the brute force solution is a little bit easier to solve. What's harder to do is trying to find like a very optimized solution to that. So you have a brute force solution, you implement it, you'll at least have some code that can kind of be passed to the hiring committee and they can kind of judge your application based off of that. On your second question in terms of like internship roles versus full-time roles, so the internship roles is for students who are currently in school, not about to graduate. But if you already have a degree, you can apply for a full-time role. So it's just different streams, I would say. Did you want to answer?
Yeah, just want to add to the second question that if you are ever looking at a non-software engineer role, as you know, Google also hires non-software engineers. There are tons of other roles. Myself, as an example, I'm a cloud consultant at Google, and there is a program called BOLD. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, BALD, BOLD program, and it is an internship program. If you were to look up at Google, if you Google it, you'll find out more information about it, and that's also some program where a lot of candidates find valuable internship experiences in. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, amazing.
So yeah, thank you, Will. I wasn't aware of that program. I think that's maybe why the kind of career role profile is helpful. You can enter in your information about like your degree, education status, kind of what seniority you're looking for, and the kind of role profile page can give you the jobs that you're looking for. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, in the hat. Yes. So your question was if you can do something in the middle of the interview that will cause you not to be hired on the spot? I don't know if it's possible. I mean, I think, yeah, like you can. I suppose if you do something truly outrageous, you know, the interviewer might decide to end things in the middle of the interview. I think if like the interviewer is going very poorly, you're just completely stuck, and you know the interviewer is giving you hints, and you just can't figure anything out. Like they'll still continue along, and you know they'll write down the notes of how it's going, and you know they'll make a recommendation to the hiring committee based off of how the interview goes. Again, as I was kind of previously stating, like even if that happens, you have another chance at this, and where the other interviewer has no idea how things went, so you'll have an opportunity at a blank slate. Yeah. Will, do you have anything to add to that? Yeah. Sure, go ahead. I see. We'll do that.
I remember it. Okay, in some certifications, we have proctor or we have a supervisor while we are presenting the test. In this case, we can to use tools or notes, or is totally the Google platform to put the information about the test with a proctor or a supervisor, or you send the test to solve at home as I can.
Oh, like the platform? Yeah. So for like software engineering interviews, like intern or otherwise, we have this kind of, it's not quite a Google Docs, but it's not quite a IDE either. It's somewhere in the middle. But it's basically like a Google platform, mostly kind of just plain text doc that you write your code in. And also you write any notes, like design ideas in as well. I think, yeah, there's some support for kind of writing code, but it's like fairly minimal.
Okay, thank you.
You want to add anything?
I would just add as well that for non-technical roles, it is something very clearly specified whether it will provide you with, you can access Notepad or anything that will be helpful during the interview. But in general, the interviewer will say that, hey, know that we'll be taking notes for you, but also at the same time, you can leverage any notepads that will be helpful to aid your thinking process. So usually it's very clearly set in terms of expectation at the beginning of the interview. Yeah, so just want to share with you overall the process.
So if I were like in an interview, right, and I was asked to like introduce myself, and I like introduce myself and then I say what my like qualifications are, as in like, oh, I study this, I've done these projects, would that be a good way to approach that question, or would it be better, or would it like not be sufficient, and would there be a better way to make myself stand out?
Maybe I can take an initial stab. So yeah, I think overall sharing a bit about your education background is always a good starting point, but also know that interviewer would want to know what kind of projects you have done in the past. Maybe you have been part of the UFD hackathon here, right? Or maybe like you have done some side projects outside is part of your extracurricular work. But also know that what oftentimes the qualities that the company looks for is also leadership skill, right? So say that if you have been part of a club or help organize a certain event, that definitely shows that you are someone who is passionate about giving back to the community. So I would say that also make sure, while highlighting your education and maybe specialization, what field you study, but also kind of share a bit about you as a person, right? Because that's also something that is very unique about everyone. I don't know, Alan, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I think generally kind of just agree with that. I think if you got anything that's like, maybe it's on your resume and you can't really talk, you want to talk more about it than kind of what is, you want to highlight it more than kind of just what is written on your resume, or maybe you can't really kind of talk about it very easily on your resume. Like this is a great opportunity for you to, introduce yourself and then kind of say like, oh, by the way, I did this thing that is like pretty impressive. I want to let you know about it. Yeah.
Hello? Okay. Couple questions. First one is, you mentioned in the interview it's like in between like a normal Google Docs and then an IDE. Are you able to run your tests? Like, is there a way to run your tests, or do you have to like manually walk through the input?
I don't know about the online assessments for the technical interview where it's like done over the video chat. There is no running test. It's basically a doc.
So you have to basically, okay, you have to run through it manually. Okay.
Yeah, I personally, like, when I did the interview, I stepped through it line by line manually.
Okay, sounds good. And secondly, for interview preparation, is there any like leak code level for internships that you would recommend practicing more of? What topics? Just an idea there.
I think I did personally like some combination, mostly mediums, a few easies, a few hards. I think for intern, like the expectation is not as high as like a full-time role, both in terms of like the difficulty of the question, but also kind of what level of like answer you have to give. I think like medium is probably like a solid. You'll want to be focused on medium, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, and the topics can range from basically anything, right? Like
Yeah,
it's not- it's
it'll
not-
be the interviewer can ask you anything, but like it's gonna be baked in like kind of fundamental computer science foundations like data structures and algorithms.
Okay, one quick last question is, in order to get the interview, oftentimes we just submit the application, but we sort of don't know the best way to get the interview. Are there any tips you have to basically ensure that your resume does get selected for an interview to proceed in the process? Because oftentimes you just submit it, you're either just like ghosted,
Yeah.
or you're rejected right away. So like, what's the sort of secret sauce to get an interview, according to you?
A few tips I would say, and then I can pass it off to you. I think the first thing is it's good to kind of apply earlier rather than later. And that's why setting up like a role profile in the Google Careers page is super helpful. If you're looking for like internship roles, for example, you can like kind of state that like in your like the Google Careers page system. And you can set up alerting for that as soon as a role opens. They'll let you know like, oh, we're recruiting now for like summer of 2026. You'll get an email, and then you can kind of go on and be like an early applicant. I think going to like career fairs, like if there's going to be Google recruiters there, that's kind of that's a helpful way as well. I think thirdly is really kind of working on your resume, making sure that it's well polished and that the underlying content that you're discussing is like strong in terms of selling that you should be able to work at Google. I think I would say those three things. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think Alan covered it. I mean, in general, I find it's always helpful to sometimes reach out to your connections, right? Maybe the school already provides you with a fairly large network, right? Someone who either has participated in Google-sponsored hackathons or somewhere that the person may have direct exposure to the experience, right? So like think about also leverage your network. I think sometimes when I reflect upon my I would say, school days, right? Something I could do more is just, like be more cognizant or be deliberate about going to a networking session, sharing a bit about myself, practice my one introductory one-liner, right? Because all these opportunities kind of also help. You never know where that leads to, and that could potentially largely affect kind of the opportunity for you to get in front of the pack.
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Any other questions? Going once. Oh. Going twice. There we go. Looks like we have a person raising his hand on the far corner. If you do you want to speak up because it takes a. I'm so sorry. I just cannot hear.
Sorry, I just had a question. So during the interview, and if there's like a live coding interview, am I allowed to do like a quick Google search for a syntax or something?
Oh, interesting.
The answer is no. You cannot do Google searches. It's possible that may change. Like you can ask the recruiter that, but I think that generally the answer is no. I think if there's something that you need to that you can't quite remember, I would say like talking to your interviewer, saying like, oh hey, there's this API or this syntax that I'm trying to remember. Here's kind of roughly how it would work, but I just can't remember exactly how it looks like. I think you can talk to your interviewer about that, and they can maybe help you out. If they don't know themselves or they say not to help you out, like I think you can do your best to either write. In that case, maybe you will have to write some pseudocode or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like that's it. If you ever have any other questions, we do have a mailing list that you can send to techstudents@google.com. Other than that, like, thank you for having us.